My granddaughter was gone in a fiery crash, but 5 months later, a girl with her eyes and her scar called me Grandma and asked where her mom was. The salt-kissed air of Bayshore never lost its magic, even after you'd breathed it your whole life. Our little coastal town was a postcard come to life. Gentle breezes carrying the scent of the ocean, colorful cottages dotting the shoreline, and friendly faces that nodded hello whether they knew you or not. It was the kind of place tourists found charming and locals considered a blessing. I worked at the Sea Glass Cup, a coffee shop perched perfectly at the corner of Main and Harbor, with wide windows that framed the ocean like a living painting. The morning crowd was mostly office workers from nearby buildings, accountants, realtors, and the occasional lawyer, all stopping for their caffeine fix before the workday truly began. My name is Emily Carter. At 18, I was saving every dollar from my waitressing job to pay for pastry classes at the local vocational school. Baking was my escape. The warm scent of butter browning in the oven, the delicate balance of sugar and salt, the look of pure happiness when someone bit into something I'd made. That was as close to magic as I believed in. I'd been an orphan since before my memories began. The children's home had been my only constant, especially after being adopted and returned, twice. The first family decided a toddler was more work than they'd bargained for. The second realized at age 7 that I wasn't going to magically become the extroverted daughter they'd envisioned. Each return taught me the same lesson. Don't get too comfortable, don't trust too deeply, don't believe anyone who says they'll stay. Every evening after my shift ended, I'd claim the corner table by the window, pull out my worn leather notebook, and jot down recipe ideas. The manager didn't mind. She said I was good energy for the place. That's where I was sitting when Julian Bennett first caught my attention. He came in every morning at precisely 7:15, tall and lean with an architect's posture, straight-backed but somehow relaxed. Chestnut brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He carried an iPad and rolled up blueprints, and he always ordered the same thing: a double espresso, no sugar. Julian hardly spoke to anyone. He'd nod politely, take his coffee to the table by the window, and immerse himself in his work. Except with me. With me, he'd exchange a quiet, "good morning" or "thank you." Nothing more, but somehow it felt like more. One rainy Tuesday, Julian left in a hurry and forgot his iPad. I ran after him, barefoot in the drizzle, calling his name. When I caught up, he turned with surprise, then smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Emily," he said, taking the device. I stood frozen. "How do you know my name?" "I pay attention." He gestured vaguely toward the coffee shop. "You wear a name tag, and the manager calls you M sometimes." From that day on, Julian chose the table closest to the counter where I worked. He'd ask tiny questions. "Any new pastries today?" Or, "Did you bake these cookies?" Small talk, but it felt significant. I began looking forward to 7:15 every morning. The realization terrified me. I was letting someone matter, and experience had taught me how dangerous that could be. Then came the blueprint. Julian slid it across the counter one morning, his eyes carefully averted as if afraid to see my reaction. "What's this?" I asked, unrolling the paper. "A kitchen design." I thought, "A baker like you deserves a space like this." It was beautiful. Windows overlooking an herb garden, a marble island perfect for rolling dough, open shelving for displaying finished creations. It was the kitchen of my dreams, one I'd never articulated to anyone. "Why would you do this?" I whispered. "Because you smile when you talk about baking. Real smiles are rare." No one had ever shown me this kind of attention before, not out of obligation or pity, but genuine interest. I didn't know how to respond. We started meeting outside the coffee shop, walks along the shoreline, conversations about dreams, about the hollow feeling of being truly alone in the world. Julian never pushed, never pressed, just listened and occasionally shared pieces of himself. When I caught a nasty cold and missed work, Julian showed up at my tiny rented room with homemade chicken soup and fresh bread. I hadn't given him my address. "How did you find me?" I asked, bewildered. "I asked Mara from your baking class. I hope that's okay." I burst into tears. Not delicate movie tears, but ugly, hiccuping sobs. No one had ever cared enough to bring me soup when I was sick. No one had ever sought me out when I disappeared. 2 weeks later, we were officially dating. Julian told me he was also an orphan of sorts. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 20, leaving him adrift and alone. "I've been building houses for other people's families," he confessed one night as we cooked dinner in my tiny kitchenette, all while wondering if I'd ever have one of my own. For the first time, I felt understood. We were two lost souls who recognized the emptiness in each other. One rainy evening, Julian took me to the beach. The stormy air whipped around us as he pulled out a simple silver ring. "I don't have family to ask for advice or blessings," he said, voice barely audible above the crashing waves. "But I have you. That's enough for me." I said yes through tears, feeling like I was finally finding my first real family. 3 months later, we married in the courthouse. No reception, no guests, just us, our silver rings, and a few strangers as witnesses. We moved into the small apartment provided by Julian's firm. It was cramped but cozy, and it was ours. At that moment, I believed I had everything I'd ever wanted. But what waited ahead was far more than I could have imagined. Our early years of marriage were simple but rich with love. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that made our small apartment feel like a palace. Julian and I developed little rituals: coffee on the balcony every Sunday, walks along the shore at sunset, and my favorite, trying new pastry recipes together. Julian was my faithful taste tester. "You're my sweet guinea pig," I'd tease as I presented him with my latest creation. He'd sample each one with exaggerated concentration, eyes closed, making thoughtful noises before delivering his verdict. Just a year after our wedding, Julian was promoted to head of the design team at his firm. I quit my job at the Sea Glass Cup to focus on advanced baking courses and started taking small orders from home. Word spread quickly about my pastries, and soon I had a steady stream of customers requesting birthday cakes and specialty desserts. "One day," Julian would say, "you'll have your own bakery. I'll design it myself." While I built my reputation with flour and sugar, Julian began sketching what he called our future home. He'd stay up late at our tiny dining table, pencil moving across paper, creating a vision of light and space. When he finally showed me the complete design, I gasped. It was a beautiful blend of glass and pale wood, with apple trees in the yard and a kitchen that opened to a garden. Modern, yet somehow timeless. "Do you like it?" he asked, nervousness in his voice. "Like it?" "Julian, it's perfect." For my birthday, he surprised me with a virtual reality headset. "Put this on," he said, eyes twinkling with excitement. When I did, I found myself standing in the kitchen he'd designed. I could virtually walk through our future home, open cabinets, look out windows, feel the flow of one room into another. I removed the headset with tears in my eyes. "Someday," he whispered, "when we have a child, you'll teach them to bake in that kitchen." The way he said it, so certain, so full of hope, made my heart swell. On our 4th anniversary, Julian's design became reality. We moved into the house he had created for us, every corner exactly as he had envisioned. Each morning, I would wake early to bake bread or pastries, filling our home with warm, sweet scents. Julian would water the young apple trees we'd planted and put on old jazz records that would drift through the open windows. On the surface, we had achieved our perfect life. But as months passed, a a shadow began to grow. Despite not using any protection, I hadn't become pregnant. At first, we laughed it off. "More time to practice," Julian would say with a wink. But as 1 year became 2, worry crept in. I tried everything: old wives' remedies, changing my diet, tracking my cycle with obsessive precision. Julian drove me to clinics in town, then to specialists in the city. Each negative test was a tiny heartbreak. I maintained my smile, but every time I saw a mother carrying a child past our window, pain stabbed through me. I'd find myself lingering in the baby section of stores, touching tiny clothes with trembling fingers before walking away empty-handed. After exhaustive testing, a doctor in the city delivered the news that shattered my world. I had a severe uterine malformation. My chances of conceiving were less than 1%. "There are other options," the doctor said gently. "Surrogacy, adoption." But I barely heard her. All I could think was that I'd failed Julian, failed the unspoken promise of the kitchen where he imagined our child learning to bake. That night, I came home, buried my face in my pillow, and wept like I hadn't since our wedding day, though for entirely different reasons. The question haunted me: was I robbing Julian of his chance to be a father? I prepared dinner that evening with special care: Julian's favorite pasta, good wine, candles on the table. I'd made up my mind. I would set him free. "You should find someone who can give you a child," I said when we'd finished eating, my voice barely steady. Julian took my hand across the table, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "I didn't choose to be a father, Emily. I chose to be your husband." 7 simple words that unlocked the tightness in my chest. That night, we held each other until dawn broke, not sleeping, barely speaking, just being. A week later, Julian came home with a handful of flyers. "If we can't have children of our own," he said, spreading them on the counter, "there are other ways to fill our lives with their laughter." The flyers were for community programs, teaching children's baking classes, volunteering at the local school, hosting art workshops for kids. "You could teach neighborhood children to bake," he suggested. "Our house would still be filled with little voices, just not all at once, and not overnight." For the first time since the doctor's verdict, I felt a flicker of light in my mind. Perhaps I didn't need to give birth to be a mother in some fashion. I was ready to accept a life without a child calling me mother, until destiny found another way to bring that child to us. After Julian's suggestion, I began to seriously consider teaching children. Standing in our bright kitchen one morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, I imagined small hands working alongside mine, learning to create. The idea took root and grew quickly. The thought triggered a rare childhood memory: my grandmother's weathered hands guiding mine as she taught me to embroider and knit. She had passed away when I was 6, but those few precious months with her had given me my only taste of maternal love. I could still feel the gentle pressure of her fingers adjusting my grip on the needle, hear her patient voice: "Steady now, little bird. Good things take time." With a newfound purpose, I threw myself into relearning every handicraft technique I could: embroidery, knitting, crochet, cross-stitch. I bought instruction books, watched tutorial videos, took notes, and practiced late into the night. Some evenings, Julian would find me still at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., perfecting a rose pattern on a handkerchief. "You've become the needle fairy," he teased one morning, finding me asleep amid colorful threads. But his eyes shone with pride as he kissed my forehead. My first teaching program was modest: 3 neighborhood girls aged 7 to 10. I spent days preparing, making felt name tags with floral patterns for each child, baking cookies, and setting out fruit juice in colorful cups. When they arrived, wide-eyed and curious, something inside me settled into place. "Today, we're going to learn how fabric becomes art," I told them, showing them simple stitches on small hoops. Our home gradually transformed. The kitchen corner became a miniature workshop with yarns hanging from hooks, ribbons arranged by color, and containers of buttons and beads sorted by size and hue. Julian built a small wooden gazebo in the yard, which the children quickly dubbed the secret corner of little artists. There, on sunny days, we would move our lessons outdoors, stitching under apple trees while birds sang overhead. The change in me was so pronounced that neighbors commented on it. I started wearing makeup again after years of neglecting it. I laughed more freely, my eyes lighting up whenever I shared stories about my students' progress. One evening, as I described how 7-year-old Sophia had finally mastered the French knot after weeks of trying, Julian took my hand across the dinner table. "You don't need to birth a child to be a mother, Emily," he said softly. "You already are one. To all those little souls." After class one evening, Julian and I sat on the porch swing, sipping herbal tea as twilight settled around us. The scent of jasmine filled the air, and somewhere distant, a wind chime sang. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in someone else's dream," Julian mused, his arm around my shoulders. "And the strange thing is, it turns out to be my own." I leaned against him, thinking how this life, though not what we'd originally planned, still held such warmth. We had found contentment in the spaces between our original desires and our present reality, but fate wasn't finished with us yet. On my 30th birthday, Julian came home later than usual. I had been waiting with a small cake I'd baked, impatient to celebrate with him. When I heard his car in the driveway, I rushed to the door, but stopped short at the sight that greeted me. Julian stood there holding a wicker basket, his face a complex mixture of shock, uncertainty, and something like wonder. "Julian, what—" "Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found her by the side of the road, near the gas station on the outskirts of town. There was no one around, just her, crying in the wind." I stepped forward and peered into the basket. Inside lay a newborn baby girl, wrapped in a worn blanket, her tiny face red from crying. Around her wrist was a small wooden bracelet with the letter A carved into it. A gasp escaped me, and my hands flew to my mouth. 1,000 questions raced through my mind, but they all fell silent when the baby opened her eyes and looked directly at me. Something primal and powerful surged through my body. Without conscious thought, I reached for her, lifting her from the basket and cradling her against my chest. The moment she settled into my arms, I felt as if every empty space inside me was suddenly filled. My body knew what to do before my mind could catch up. Julian watched us, saying nothing, allowing me this moment of connection. Finally, he spoke. "I've already called the police. They're sending someone." He hesitated. "But Emily, if you want, we could be her new beginning. We could give her a home." The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb, and in that instant, I knew there was only one answer I could give. "Yes," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Yes." I named her Lily Bennett, a name as delicate and clear as her eyes. Julian made calls that night, setting legal proceedings in motion. His company's lawyer handled the adoption paperwork, navigating the complexities of taking in an abandoned child. The authorities searched for Lily's birth parents or relatives, but found no one. After 6 months of temporary guardianship, with home visits from social workers and countless forms, Lily officially became our daughter. The day we received the final adoption certificate, Julian framed it and hung it beside our wedding photo. "Our family's second beginning," he called it. That night, as I rocked Lily to sleep in the nursery Julian had hastily but lovingly prepared, I realized a profound truth. I hadn't given birth to this child, but from the moment she entered our lives, I knew that blood was only a small part of motherhood. Love, that fierce protective force that would move mountains to keep her safe, that was what made me truly a mother. Lily grew up surrounded by the boundless love Julian and I poured into her life. She was a healthy, happy child, quick to laugh, and with the endearing habit of clutching the collar of my shirt while falling asleep. Every night, Julian would sit at the edge of her bed and tell fairy tales, often weaving Lily's name into the stories, making her the princess who saved kingdoms or the clever girl who outwitted dragons. And then Princess Lily used her magic needle to sew a bridge across the river, saving all the woodland creatures, he would say, while our daughter's eyes widened with wonder. From an early age, Lily was different from other children, quiet, contemplative, with eyes still as lake water. While other kids her age chased each other, screaming with delight, Lily preferred to sit with younger children, teaching them to fold paper cranes or build block towers. She showed a fascination with the alphabet by age 3, tracing letters in spilled flour on the kitchen counter. "She's an old soul," Julian would say, watching her arrange her books in perfect rows. I spent countless hours teaching Lily the crafts I loved: sewing, baking, embroidery. She took to them naturally, her small fingers surprisingly nimble. What struck me most was her choice of subjects. While other children embroidered houses or people, Lily always chose suns, birds, or flowers. "Why don't you ever stitch people?" I asked her once as she worked on a delicate blue jay design. She looked up, those solemn eyes meeting mine. "People are sad too much, Mommy. The sky isn't." Julian and I exchanged glances over her head, both recognizing something profound in our 7-year-old's observation. By the time Lily turned 12, her natural teaching ability had become apparent. She started helping with my crafting classes, showing remarkable patience with the youngest children. "Hold the needle like this," she would demonstrate, her voice gentle but firm. "That's it. You're doing great." After class one day, as we cleaned up scattered threads and fabric scraps, Lily said something I'll never forget. "Mom, I want all the kids to believe they can make something beautiful." "Is that why you help them so much?" I asked. She nodded seriously. "Everyone should know they can create something from nothing." It came as no surprise when Lily received a full scholarship to study education at the state university. What did surprise us was her decision after graduation to turn down an offer from an exclusive private school to teach at the public elementary school just 3 miles from our home. "The kids who need me most are there," she explained simply. Julian was slightly disappointed. He'd envisioned her in the prestigious halls of academia, but he respected her choice. "If that's how you choose to make the world better," he told her, "then that's exactly what you should do." It was at a community art fair, where Lily had helped her students display their projects, that she met Felix Moore. He was tall, artistic, with a carefree charm that reminded me of Julian in his younger days. He stood before his abstract paintings, paint-splattered jeans and messy hair completing the image of the bohemian artist. They fell for each other quickly. Too quickly, I thought, but kept my concerns to myself. Felix moved into Lily's small apartment within months. I tried to like him, but something about his lifestyle troubled me. He seemed to paint constantly but sell rarely, spending more time discussing his artistic vision than pursuing gallery showings. "He's a bit unfocused," I suggested gently to Lily one afternoon while we baked together. "Mom," she replied with that patient teacher's voice she'd perfected, "artists sometimes need to be loved more than they need to be analyzed." I bit my tongue and passed her the sugar. 8 months later, Lily called on a Tuesday morning, her voice strange and tight. Could she come over? When she arrived, her eyes were red but dry. She was pregnant, and Felix was gone. She'd gone to his studio that morning to share the news, only to find the door locked. The building superintendent told her Felix had packed his things and left before dawn. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Lily sank into our couch, resting her head against my shoulder. "I was stupid, wasn't I, Mom?" I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply made her favorite cinnamon tea, brought out the fresh Turon pastries I knew she loved, and sat beside her. Not stupid at all, I told her, stroking her hair as I had when she was small. You'll be an amazing mother. Julian took the news differently. He said little, but the next day quietly put a down payment on a small practical car for Lily. For doctor's appointments, he said gruffly, and later, for daycare runs. Zoe Bennett came into the world 2 weeks early, a tiny bundle with a fierce cry that seemed too big for her small body. Julian and I had prepared everything, painted the nursery, installed safety gates, bought a crib monitor, and covered the floor with soft play mats. As Lily recovered from the delivery, I held my granddaughter, marveling at how this tiny person could instantly claim such a huge portion of my heart. Zoe grew like sunshine penetrating the darkest corners of our lives, bringing light where we hadn't even realized there were shadows. Unlike her mother, Zoe was boisterous and energetic. Where Lily had been content to sit quietly, Zoe was climbing furniture before she could properly walk. Her laughter echoed through our house like wind chimes in a summer breeze. Julian taught her to aim a water gun, delighting in her squeals when they had backyard battles. I showed her how to cut perfect cookie shapes, though she preferred eating the dough. Lily read to her for hours and taught her to identify colors in everything around her. Our home became filled with noise again, toys scattered across floors, impromptu dance parties in the kitchen, bedtime stories that required dramatic voices and sound effects. Julian watched it all with a contentment I'd never seen before. I may not have the big family I once dreamed of, he told me one evening as we watched Lily helping Zoe build a blanket fort, but I have this perfect little universe. I don't know if destiny allows happiness to exist forever, but I do know that if there's one thing worth all the pain we endured, it's the sight of Lily holding Zoe as they nap in the afternoon sunlight, while Julian sits nearby, softly strumming his guitar. Those first days after Zoe's birth remain etched in my memory with crystal clarity. The overwhelming rush of emotion when I first held her in my arms, this tiny being who smelled of milk and freshly laundered cotton. Her skin was impossibly soft, her fingers so small they could barely wrap around my thumb. Though I'd held Lily as an infant, this was different. With Zoe, I was present from the very beginning, watching a new life unfold before my eyes. Julian cradled her with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. He lifted her gently toward the ceiling, his own eyes glistening. "My mother used to say," he whispered, "that grandchildren are the reward for living a decent life." He kissed her forehead, and in that moment, I saw the full circle of love that had somehow found its way to us despite all odds. Lily was still learning to be a mother, her hands sometimes trembling as she bathed Zoe in the small plastic tub. I stood behind her, my arms surrounding both mother and child, guiding her movements much as I had done years ago when teaching her to shape bread dough. "Support her head like this," I'd murmur. "That's it. You're doing beautifully." Our entire household spun into a new rhythm of existence. Nights became punctuated by crying, the hum of the bottle warmer, the rustle of diapers, and the tinkling melodies of musical toys. Julian, to my surprise, volunteered for night duty often, changing diapers and singing Zoe the same old lullabies he once sang to Lily. I would sometimes wake to find him walking the hallway with Zoe against his shoulder, his voice low and soothing in the darkness. I found myself baking less, my kitchen skills redirected to preparing nourishing foods for Lily, homemade fruit yogurt to help her recover, hearty soups laden with vegetables, and easy-to-eat meals she could manage while nursing. Zoe grew rapidly, her personality emerging like a force of nature. From the moment she learned to crawl, she refused to stay still. She climbed stairs, explored cabinets, and once managed to wedge herself under the coffee table where we found her giggling, delighted with her hiding spot. Her first word wasn't "Mama," as we all expected, but Geepaw, a nickname she invented for Julian that stuck immediately. Lily pretended to be offended, laughing as she told him, "This daughter of mine loves her grandpa more than her own mother." The differences between Zoe and Lily became more pronounced with each passing month. Where Lily had been contemplative and quiet, Zoe exploded with energy like a firework. She loved water and sand, climbing and jumping, and seemed happiest when thoroughly messy. While Lily had been content with books and drawing, Zoe preferred physical activities, attempting karate kicks before she could properly walk and turning every open space into a dance floor. Our family of 3 generations lived in harmonious chaos. Julian taught Zoe to build blanket forts and played spy reconnaissance games in the garden, crawling behind bushes with exaggerated stealth that made her shriek with laughter. I introduced her to cookie baking, helping her cut animal shapes that she referred to as her cookie zoo. Lily returned to teaching part-time when Zoe turned 2, occasionally bringing students to our garden for outdoor science lessons. Watching my daughter teach while her daughter napped in a portable crib under the apple tree filled me with a pride I can't describe. Sunday afternoons became sacred family time. We'd pack the car with supplies and head to the beach, where Julian would construct an elaborate tent while I prepared sandwiches to grill over a small portable stove. Lily taught Zoe to write her name in the sand, while Julian showed her how to craft friendship bracelets from small pieces of driftwood and colorful string. I'd sometimes step back from these scenes, watching my family from a distance, overwhelmed by a sense of wonder. How had I gotten so lucky? How had the lonely orphan girl from the sea glass cup found herself at the center of such love? One evening, as we sat on the porch swing watching Zoe chase fireflies in the yard, Julian took my hand and whispered, "Do you remember the day you told me I should find someone else to have children with? How do you feel about that now?" I laughed softly, but tears spilled down my cheeks. Not from regret, but from the profound understanding that everything we had built came from love, not blood. "I was wrong," I said simply. "This family wasn't made the way I expected, but it's more perfect than anything I could have imagined." One night, as I tucked Zoe into bed, she grabbed my hand, her small face serious in the glow of her butterfly nightlight. "Grandma," she whispered conspiratorially, "someday I'm going to be a mommy too. But my mommy is my mommy, and you're my mommy's mommy. So doesn't that make you my mommy times 2? The innocent logic of her question caught me off guard. I pulled her close, too overwhelmed to speak, happiness rendering me speechless. In her childish way, she had captured the beautiful complexity of our family, connections not always made of blood, but always made of love. As I kissed her goodnight and watched her eyelids grow heavy, I believed we had reached our happily ever after. Our family had formed in unexpected ways, but it felt complete, perfect in its imperfections. I thought happiness would be the ending to our story, but I soon learned that life never lets anyone remain in a dream state for too long. The storm was already gathering on the horizon, and none of us saw it coming. It began with small things, so minor I barely noticed at first. Julian would leave the stove on after making tea. He'd call Lily's students by the wrong names when they visited. Once, I found him sitting motionless in the garden, staring at the apple trees with a confused expression. When I asked what he was doing, he blinked several times before answering, "I'm not sure." I attributed these lapses to stress, to the natural aging process. After all, Julian was approaching 60. But something in my heart whispered that these weren't normal signs of getting older. There was a vacant look in his eyes sometimes, as if he'd momentarily stepped away from himself. "You're working too hard," I told him one evening after he'd forgotten our dinner plans. "Maybe we should take a vacation." But the vacation never happened. Instead, there were doctor's appointments, tests, specialists, and finally, the devastating diagnosis, a malignant brain tumor. Terminal. Stage 4. How long? I managed to ask the neurologist, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. 6 months. Perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Julian, who had been silently absorbing the news, reached for my hand and squeezed it. I built this house, he said quietly on the drive home. Now it's your job to keep it standing after I'm gone. I wanted to scream, to demand that the universe take me instead, to bargain with any force that might listen. But Julian's calm acceptance showed me how to face what was coming, not with rage, but with love. We didn't tell Lily and Zoe immediately. Instead, Julian began preparing in his own way. He taught 5-year-old Zoe to tie her shoelaces, showing her the bunny ear method with infinite patience. He demonstrated the safest way to climb the apple tree, insisting she practice until she could do it perfectly. "Why are you teaching me everything at once, Jeepa?" Zoe asked one afternoon. Julian looked at me over her head, his eyes full. "Because you're getting so big so fast, little bug. I don't want to miss anything." At night, he wrote letters. To Lily, to me, to Zoe. Short notes that he hid in books, taped behind picture frames, tucked into jewelry boxes. Messages of love to be discovered long after he was gone. I began recording his voice as he told stories, preserving the warm timbre that had filled our home for decades. When we finally told Lily, she collapsed into Julian's arms like she was 7 years old again. "Daddy," she whispered, a word she rarely used, preferring dad since her teenage years. That single word contained a universe of love and grief. Julian's decline happened both gradually and suddenly. There were good days when he seemed almost his old self, laughing with Zoe or discussing school politics with Lily. Then there were days when the tumor pressed against his memory, making him confused, sometimes forgetting who I was. But through it all, he never failed to smile when Zoe called Gipa, that name reaching some part of him that remained untouched by illness. On a crisp autumn morning, with golden light streaming through the bedroom window, Julian took his last breath in my arms. His eyes opened slightly at the end, looking toward the window where sunlight cast patterns on the ceiling. I like to think he was seeing something beautiful, something beyond my perception. "The light," he whispered. "It's so bright." And then he was gone. Following Julian's wishes, we scattered his ashes at sea. We rented a small boat, taking with us flowers, his favorite cookies, and a letter Lily had written him years ago when she graduated college. As we reached the spot where the water turned from teal to deep blue, we each took turns saying goodbye. Zoe threw a small bouquet of daisies into the waves. "Bye, Jeepa," she said, her voice small but steady. "When I learn to swim really good, I'll swim out to visit you." The emptiness that followed Julian's death was like a physical presence in our home. I felt untethered, as if the emotional and spiritual center of our family had vanished. Lily tried to be strong, especially for Zoe, but I often caught her with red-rimmed eyes staring at old photographs. Zoe, too young to fully understand the permanence of death, would ask heartbreaking questions. "Why doesn't Jeepaw come to dinner anymore?" Or, "Is Jeepaw still swimming in the ocean?" A year after Julian's death, Lily announced that she and Zoe would visit her college roommate Isabella, who lived 3 states away. Something about the trip made me uneasy, a vague dread I couldn't explain. "Don't go," I urged, knowing how irrational I sounded. "Stay another week." "Yee," Lily laughed, her eyes finally showing some of their old sparkle. "Mom, it's just 3 days. We'll call every night, I promise." I helped them pack, tucking extra snacks into Zoe's backpack and checking that Lily had her roadside assistance card. I hugged them both longer than usual in the driveway, memorizing the feeling of their arms around me. "See you Thursday," Lily called as they drove away, Zoe waving frantically from her car seat. I waved back until their car disappeared around the bend. The call came at 3:47 the next afternoon. A semi-truck had lost control on the highway, crossing the median and hitting Lily's car head-on. The vehicles had burst into flames. There were no survivors. I listened to the police officer's words, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. There must be some mistake. Not my Lily, not my Zoe, not the only family I had left. Identification had been made through personal effects. The pearl earrings Lily always wore, my wedding gift to her, and the stone bracelet on Zoe's wrist, handcrafted by Julian. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I simply sat in Julian's old chair, clutching a framed photo of our family, repeating the same words over and over. It's not possible. It's not possible. I sold our house, the house Julian had designed with such love. I couldn't bear its emptiness, the echoes of Zoe's laughter in hallways that would never again hold her running feet. I moved to a small cottage by the sea, where the constant sound of waves could sometimes drown out my thoughts. No one called me Little Bird anymore, Julian's pet name for me. No one sang in the kitchen early in the morning. The silence was absolute. For 2 months, I canceled my crafting classes. I couldn't bring myself to touch pastry dough or open the windows to let in fresh air. At night, I dreamed of Julian, Lily, and Zoe calling my name, but I could never reach them, no matter how fast I ran. Each morning, waking up was like dying all over again, the brief, blessed amnesia of sleep, giving way to the crushing reality of my loss. I wasn't Emily Carter anymore. I was just what remained of something that had once been beautiful. But destiny wasn't finished with me yet. It was only beginning again, in the most unexpected way. In the months following Lily and Zoe's deaths, I existed like a shadow in my small seaside cottage. The walls seemed to absorb my grief, reflect it back to me in waves that matched the ocean's rhythm outside my window. I eventually resumed teaching a few of my crafting classes, but it was mechanical. My hands remembered what to do even when my heart wasn't in it. My home no longer smelled of cookies. I stopped baking, stopped embroidering, stopped singing. The silence became my constant companion, broken only by the sound of waves and occasional seagulls that reminded me painfully of happier days at the Sea Glass Cup. The cemetery became my sanctuary. 3 times a week I would bring Turon pastries, Lily's favorite, and place them at the joint grave where my daughter and granddaughter were buried. It was there I first noticed Henry Alvarez, a quiet, gentle-faced man who tended the grounds. He was always working, raking leaves, arranging flowers visitors had left, clearing debris after storms. We exchanged nods for weeks before any words passed between us. One gray afternoon, I found him sitting beneath an oak tree, sorting through wilted flowers he'd collected from various grave sites. I sat nearby on a stone bench and, without planning to, began talking about Lily and Zoe. I told him about Lily's teaching, Zoe's laughter, the way they had filled my home with life. I spoke as if they might return any day, a mother not yet accepting death's finality. Henry listened silently, his hands continuing their methodical work. When I finally ran out of words, he looked up. "She wasn't your biological daughter, was she?" he asked softly. The question startled me, but I felt no offense. "No," I answered simply. "We adopted her when she was an infant." Henry nodded, his eyes distant. "I thought so. There was something in the way you described finding her." There was an odd heaviness to his words that made me watch him more carefully. He seemed to be gathering courage for something. "I had a daughter once," he finally said. Or, I should say, I had a daughter I never knew. His story emerged slowly, painfully. When he was very young, he had fallen in love with a girl named Clara, an orphan like me, poor and struggling. When Clara became pregnant, her remaining family disowned her. She moved into Henry's cramped apartment, and they dreamed of starting a family despite their circumstances. Clara gave birth in that apartment, with only a former nurse who lived next door to help them. It should have been the beginning of their family story. Instead, it became tragedy. She hemorrhaged, Henry said, his voice hollow with the memory. The bleeding wouldn't stop. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. He described holding his newborn daughter paralyzed with grief and terror. He had just lost the woman he loved and now had a tiny life depending solely on him. No money, no family support, no idea how to care for an infant. I wrapped her in a blanket and walked outside, thinking maybe someone could help me, he continued. That's when a car pulled up. A chill ran through me as Henry described the man who stopped, tall, kind-eyed, well-dressed, the man who saw his desperation and offered a solution. He said he and his wife couldn't have children of their own, Henry said. He promised they would love my baby as their own daughter if I trusted them with her. He showed me pictures of their home, talked about his wife who loved to bake. My hands began to tremble as the pieces aligned in my mind. This man, I whispered. Was his name Julian? Henry's eyes widened. Yes, Julian Bennett. The wooden bracelet with the carved A that Lily had worn when Julian found her. Julian's story about finding her abandoned near some bushes with no one around. It all made sense now. I carved a small wooden bracelet for my baby, Henry said, with the letter A for Amara, the name Clara had chosen. I left it with her, some small piece of us she could keep. Julian never lied to me, I said, my voice catching. He just protected me from the hardest part of the story. I invited Henry back to my cottage, where I made tea with shaking hands. From a cedar box of Lily's keepsakes, I removed the small wooden bracelet she had treasured all her life. When Henry saw it, he broke down completely, weeping like a child. I placed my hand on his shoulder. You loved her enough to give her to someone who could care for her, I whispered. No one could blame you for that. After that day, Henry began visiting weekly. He would tend my small garden, fix loose boards on the fence, replace weathered window frames, and clear cobwebs from corners I couldn't reach. Slowly, his presence brought life back into my home. I started baking again, just simple cookies at first, then bread, and finally, a batch of Turon that we shared in silence, both thinking of Lily. One afternoon, we sat drinking tea in Zoe's old playhouse that I'd kept in the garden. I told him about Julian's final days, about the emptiness that followed losing everyone I loved. I considered ending it all, Henry admitted quietly, after Clara died and I gave up our baby. But now, he looked around at the garden, at me. I feel like I've found a piece of Clara again. Through knowing you, I can finally see parts of the life my daughter had. Our unusual friendship, two people who had lost everything, gradually became a source of strength for us both. We understood each other's pain in ways no one else could. I never thought I would laugh again, but I did. And destiny was about to light another small flame of hope. This time, a light no one could have anticipated. As the months passed, I developed severe insomnia. Night after night, I would lie awake, watching shadows move across my ceiling, remembering faces I would never see again. Prescription medications did nothing. My mind refused to quiet itself. My memory began to fade around the edges, and my emotions dulled like a knife too long without sharpening. Henry noticed my deterioration. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me with concern in his eyes. I have an old friend, he said hesitantly. Mason Rivers. He lives deep in the woods, knows how to make herbal remedies. Would you like to try? I nodded, not out of hope, but because I had nothing left to lose. What difference did it make if I tried one more failed cure? The following Sunday, we set out in Henry's old pickup truck, traveling along winding roads that gradually turned from asphalt to red dirt. The smell of decaying leaves and rich earth filled the air as we drove deeper into the forest. Insects hummed in the dense undergrowth, and occasionally small creatures darted across our path. Mason's cabin appeared suddenly, a weathered wooden structure almost consumed by the forest around it. Moss covered portions of the roof, and the porch sagged slightly in the middle. It looked as though it had grown from the earth rather than been built upon it. As we approached, the front door creaked open. A small girl, perhaps 6 years old, with curly hair and wearing an oversized wool sweater, bounded out onto the porch. "Are you here to see Grandpa?" she asked brightly, her voice cutting through the forest silence. I froze mid-step. Henry stopped beside me, his hand suddenly gripping my arm. The child had Zoe's eyes, the exact same shape, the same depth, the same slight tilt at the corners. The eyes I had kissed goodnight hundreds of times. "Who is this?" I whispered to Henry, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Before he could answer, an elderly man appeared in the doorway behind the girl. "Laura, don't run off without your jacket," he called. Then, noticing us, "Henry, it's been years. Come in, come in," Mason explained as we sat in his small, herb-scented kitchen. The girl's name was Laura. At least, that's what he called her. He had found her in the forest after a severe storm 5 months earlier, injured and confused. "She was wandering along the creek bed," Mason said quietly while the child played with wooden blocks in the corner. Her head was bleeding, clothes torn to shreds. She couldn't remember anything except that her name was Lo. I started calling her Laura. My hands trembled as I watched the child. I walked over and knelt beside her, gently touching the necklace she wore, a simple cord with a small wooden charm. There was no stone bracelet like the one Zoe had worn, but on her wrist was a distinctive crescent-shaped scar that I recognized instantly. "Zoe," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The child looked up, her eyes widening. "You called my name," she said, tilting her head curiously. "Who are you?" Tears spilled down my cheeks, not tears of pain this time, but the first real hope I had felt in more than a year. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly, feeling her small heart beat against mine. "I'm your grandmother," I managed to say. "Grandma Emily." She didn't pull away, just looked at me with those familiar eyes. "Where's my mommy?" The drive home was surreal. In the back seat, Zoe, not Laura, told us fragments of what she remembered. The car jerking violently, a strange girl sitting beside her, a hitchhiker Lily had picked up, I later learned. Her mother screaming, then darkness. I realized what had happened. The impact had thrown Zoe from the vehicle before it burst into flames. The hitchhiker, wearing Zoe's stone bracelet that she must have given to her new friend, had been mistaken for my granddaughter in the aftermath of the devastating crash. The police investigation confirmed everything. DNA samples from Zoe's old hairbrush matched perfectly. The authorities admitted their mistake. The bodies had been too badly burned for proper identification, and they had relied heavily on the personal effects found at the scene. I brought Zoe home, our home now, with Henry carrying her up the porch steps as if she were made of glass. I had kept her room exactly as it was, unable to part with her things even when I believed her gone. "Where's Jeepa?" she asked that first night, looking around the house. I sat beside her on the bed and explained as gently as I could about Julian. She listened solemnly, then walked to the shelf where I kept his photograph and lit a small candle beside it, something she had never done before. "Tomorrow I'll make a wooden circle like Jeepa taught me," she said softly. I smiled through tears, feeling as though Julian was sitting somewhere nearby in the breeze coming through the window. Gradually, Zoe settled back into life. She returned to school, made new friends, and joined my crafting classes. In a small diary I gave her, she wrote about Mason. He's like a wizard with a long beard who makes bitter tea. Henry officially moved into Julian's old study. Not as a replacement, never that, but as a guardian of what remained of our family. We formed a strange trio. Myself, Henry, and Zoe. 3 generations bound not by blood but by love and loss, and finding each other in the wilderness of grief. On warm Sunday afternoons, we would go to the beach. The very beach where Julian had proposed to me so many years ago. Zoe would run across the sand, her hair flying in the wind. Henry would build a small driftwood shelter, and I would set out freshly baked cookies on a blanket. In the wet sand, our footprints told our story. 3 different sets of prints, 3 different rhythms of life, 3 wounded souls walking the same path forward. I once lost everything, but fate, in its strange and painful way, returned what belonged to me. Not in the same order, not wholly intact, but enough for me to continue living, this time without fear of loss.